You don't wake up one day and suddenly stop feeling. You don't go from warm to numb in a single moment. Emotional burnout is quieter than that. And when a woman loves an avoidant man, it doesn't happen the way people assume. They think she loses interest. They think she gets tired. They think she simply moves on. But the truth is far more psychological, far more gradual, and far more devastating. It starts with caring too much for someone who feels safest, caring too little. She begins as the nurturer, the emotional container, the patient one, the one who senses subtle shifts like weather changes in the relationship. She understands his walls. She feels his fear. She interprets his distance as woundedness, not rejection. And for a long time, her empathy becomes the bridge that keeps the whole connection alive. But bridges can only carry weight for so long before the structure beneath them starts to crack. Because loving an avoidant man often means living in a constant emotional contradiction. You feel close to someone who feels safest far away. You give your heart to someone who gives their absence. You offer vulnerability to someone who fears their own. At first she compensates, she reassures, she stabilizes, she adjusts. She makes room for his fear of closeness, believing love can heal what childhood made unsafe. She sees him not as distant, but as wounded, not as cold, but as scared. But something slowly shifts inside her, not loudly, not dramatically, but subtly. The beginning of emotional burnout never announces itself. It feels like small internal hesitations, quiet moments of confusion, little pockets of loneliness, even while he's right there beside her. This is where the emotional erosion begins. In Jungian psychology, the psyche reacts to imbalance with withdrawal, not as punishment, not as revenge, but as self-protection. And this is exactly what happens to the empathic woman loving the avoidant man. She starts carrying both emotional roles, hers and his. She regulates both nervous systems, hers and his. She tries to predict both emotional needs, hers and his. Eventually, her system reaches capacity, long before she consciously realizes it. The burnout begins in phase 1. She starts doubting herself. She wonders if she's asking for too much. If emotional connection is unreasonable. If wanting consistency is pressure. If she should be more understanding, be less reactive, or be more patient. She becomes hyper-aware of every request she makes. She edits herself mid-sentence. She plays psychologist, caretaker, and partner all at once. But nothing changes, nothing stabilizes. Because avoidant men don't respond to emotional cues, they respond to emotional pressure. They retreat from what she shares instead of leaning toward it. They feel fear at the very moment she hopes for closeness. And slowly, she learns a painful truth. When she expresses a need, he disappears. When she reaches out, he pulls away. When she wants connection, he feels threatened. Her nervous system becomes exhausted from trying to bridge a gap he has no intention of closing. Phase 2 of burnout is the emotional parentification of the relationship. She becomes the emotional adult. He becomes the emotional child. She adapts. She explains. She manages. She reminds. She forgives. She softens. She rationalizes. He avoids. He shuts down. He resets. He returns. He avoids again. She doesn't realize it yet, but she is being slowly drained. Her empathy becomes labor. Her patience becomes survival. Her love becomes an unpaid emotional job. And then something very subtle begins to shift. The beginning of the numbness. Phase 3. Her emotional system goes into self-preservation mode. This phase is quiet, invisible, internal. She stops initiating the deep conversations she once initiated. She stops expressing the fantasies of a shared future. She stops bringing up the small hurts because she knows he will shut down or minimize them. And then she does something she never imagined she would do. She stops reaching for him. Not because she no longer cares, but because reaching hurts more than silence. This is the beginning of numbness, not the absence of love, but the absence of energy to keep carrying the relationship alone. In Jungian terms, the psyche begins withdrawing libido, emotional life force, from what no longer feels reciprocal. The woman who once poured warmth now pours nothing. Not because she is cold, but because she has no emotional fuel left. Phase 4. She becomes the observer instead of the participant. She watches him avoid closeness the same way one watches a movie they've already seen. She sees the pattern before it happens. She predicts the distance before he takes it. She anticipates the shutdown before a real conversation can begin. Where she once felt anxious, she now feels nothing. Her nervous system has stopped expecting connection. Her heart has stopped hoping for reciprocity. Her psyche has stopped believing that nurturing will transform avoidance into intimacy. This numbness isn't apathy. It's exhaustion wearing a mask. And yet, this is the phase that confuses him the most. Because avoidant men expect emotional intensity from the women who love them. They expect heartbreak, confrontation, longing, pursuit. But when the empath becomes numb, she becomes unpredictable. He senses her shift instinctively. He feels the loss of the emotional oxygen she used to supply. He notices she no longer performs the emotional labor he once depended on, and this triggers the one thing avoidant men fear, yet secretly need, the collapse of their illusion of control. Because when the empath becomes numb, she no longer reacts. She no longer internalizes his behavior. She no longer tries to pull him closer. She simply stops. Not emotionally, psychologically. The archetype shifts. The nurturer becomes the withdrawer. The soother becomes the shadow. The empath becomes the one who distances, and this is where the emotional dynamic flips. Phase 5. He panics. Not outwardly, not directly, but internally. Avoidant men don't fear losing the relationship. They fear losing the version of themselves they could be around you. They fear losing the person who made connection feel safe. They fear losing the emotional mirror that reflected back their humanity. But by the time he realizes this, she is already gone internally. Even if her body is still there, her heart is on a raft drifting away. Not in anger, not in rebellion, but in self-protection. Because burnout isn't explosive, it's dissolving, a quiet slipping away of emotional availability. People think the empath's numbness means she stopped loving him, but the truth is far more heartbreaking. She didn't stop loving him, she just stopped abandoning herself to love him. And once a woman reaches that point, once she goes from nurturing to numb, the relationship as she once knew it is over. Maybe she walks away physically. Maybe she stays for a time. Maybe he tries to reach for her once he feels her slipping. But something inside her no longer ignites. Something inside her no longer spills over with hope. Something inside her knows she cannot keep giving to someone who translates her closeness as threat. And that is the emotional burnout of loving an avoidant man. It doesn't end in dramatic heartbreak. It ends in emotional neutrality, a quiet letting go, a final internal exhale. She doesn't leave because she stopped caring. She leaves because she finally realized she cannot be the bridge to someone who refuses to cross. And that realization, calm, steady, and deeply self-aware, becomes the moment she returns to herself.